You'd like us to give you an agreement that you can condition your
Right.
decision on.
So
And
that-
that's because we don't control, we don't have the legal right to use the Citizens, we, the applicants.
The applicant.
Do
that's
not
who-
have a legal right to use Citizens Bank.
With all due respect, Abbey Park's not before the board.
Yeah, I know, that's the problem. And that's been my problem all along with how to approach this.
It
But,
is a
you know,
problem, because, you know, we can have we can make this conditioned upon an agreement with Abbey Park, but, you know, Abbey Park doesn't have to do it. I mean, we have one applicant here, not two. And so,
I mean, originally I
I-
thought you'd have to look at the two lots that we own, because we do have a ratio of 2.5 spaces to each seat in the restaurant, and that, we have enough parking. But you have a concern, and it's a legitimate one, with the existing restaurant, which was using one of these parking lots. What we're explaining to you is they have the right to use the Citizens Bank parking lot on their own. And Falcone, which is purchasing number 3, has purchased number 3, will have 20 more spaces there. And that's, if you wanted to separate the two, if you're not having a hearing on Abbey Park right now, they would still have parking, the parking
I
they
think we
require.
have to decide this not based on, the agreement with Abbey Park is not in place right now. And I would hate to have one restaurant bound by that in their permit and not the other restaurant.
Right.
And so, even though it makes sense to look at the problem as one, I think this is not the forum for it. I think what we have to do is we have to figure out which parking lots can be attributable to the application that we're looking at right now.
Right.
And if that isn't, if that's enough parking, then, you know, I don't want to say Abbey Park parking be damned, because, you know, that's not helping the neighborhood at all. But I think we need to look, if there's enough dedicated parking spots for just the Falcone restaurant, then we can determine whether or not there's enough. And I believe,
Yep. We own
Your
Lot
name?
1 and, Jean Falcone Schmidt. I don't think I.
Gina, you have to come up to the
So we own
table.
Lot 1 and 2. So for this restaurant, this application, we have more than enough parking spaces. There's 39 in our 4 Franklin Street lot, and there's also 25 in Lot 2. So that more than meets the demand for parking for this new restaurant, which is the applicant.
But
Have you-
you can't stop there, because Lot 1 is being used by an
Well,
existing
what I-
application that's been issued to Abbey
what I
Park.
want to ask,
They
right,
already have a notice.
Notice to
They're on a
quit.
month-to-month. And Abbey Park, as he said, has a agreement with Citizens Bank, which he's always had. He just doesn't need it right now.
And that
But
lot,
our new restaurant's proposal has plenty of parking.
so the parking behind Abbey Park, is that leased in any way?
It's on a month-to-month lease, and we've already given him a notice that we can terminate it at any time.
And without that, was the special permit given to Abbey Park conditioned upon that lot or not?
It was, but we also have
Citizens Bank.
Citizens Bank parking lot.
So when you got your special permit, how many parking spots were you required to provide?
45, I believe.
I think it was 40.
40?
40? And,
So between the Franklin Street lot and Citizens, there was plenty.
right, but if we assume that the applicant terminates your right to use Franklin Street, you're left with with Citizens, which is insufficient to support it.
Well, that's why we created a parking solution with a valet plan.
And that's all I'm asking, if that agreement can be formalized, so
Okay.
that we have something that binds the parties to this, because otherwise we're playing a shell game, right?
I agree.
I think we're going back to an area that we can't actually support is in a legal sense.
If we bring to the Board of Appeals, if we come back to you, if you can condition this decision, or however you want to put it, and we will provide an agreement between Abbey Park, the restaurant Abbey Park, and this applicant about shared parking.
I'm not sure I want to do that.
Okay,
what I want to do is I want to figure the numbers are going to work
Okay.
as we have them. And so I'm looking at Citizens being kind of in the purview of Abbey Park right now with 25 spots, and you need to have 15 more. So if you were to take 15 from the 45 at Franklin Street, leaving 30 for Falcone's Restaurant, that would be, you would still have 30 plus 33, plus the Sprint building of 20, you have 83 spots. Is that right?
Between all 4 lots.
I think we lost a few spaces.
Yeah, yeah, you
Between
have
all 4 lots,
25
we have
plus 30, that's
123.
55 for
123.
Falcone.
123 for all 4 lots. because
Okay.
we utilize them all.
Or 103 without the Sprint lot,
Yeah.
but I don't,
Let's,
Standing alone between Lot 3 and Lot 4, that provides a total of 45 spaces between lots 3 and 4. It seems like Abbey Park already has the agreement with Lot 4. Lot 3, the Falcones have said, is going to be available for parking. So between Lot 3 and 4, you're providing a minimum of 45 spaces. Abbey Park requires 40. So that, between 3 and 4, Abbey Park stands on its own. As stated earlier, between 1 and 2, we provide the 2.5 to 1 ratio for the proposed building. So 1 and 2 stand on their own for the current application.
so, so even, location number 1, which, well, the parking space, the 40 parking spaces were predicated for your, for Abbey Park. But not specifically those spots. It was 40 spots.
Yeah.
So that means that we can subtract 40 spots from the 123 spots that we have available, and we're still keeping everybody happy. And that still gives you considerably more than 2 seats per spot.
You do know that Abbey Park will be the new owner of the restaurant. That's why we're trying to work with them.
And
Does it matter?
it doesn't really matter.
Okay, because we have more than enough parking spaces.
Yeah.
Even between the 2 lots, we're ending up with 78, which is only 2 short
Mm-hmm.
for both restaurants, so. I mean, we really have enough parking spaces.
Any questions on the parking? Fellow board members?
for clarity, the Board of Appeals has in the past always determined what parking would be sufficient for each restaurant applicant as they came along. And so I believe the chairman is trying to do that now.
Yes.
At the same time, because the parking lot that we're designating for this restaurant was leased to Abbey Park, and everybody knows it, we're trying to explain to you that Abbey Park has made plans and secured parking so that it will still meet its parking requirement. In addition to that, we're telling you that as part of our overall parking management plan for the planning board as well as the Board of Appeals, we do plan to, this applicant will be working with the other major restaurant, Abbey Park, to manage parking together. And so it's up to the board how they decide, to issue or not issue a special permit, but they can issue it and tie it to the parking provided for this restaurant. And if they do that, they have sufficient information to understand where Abbey Park is going to be parking, since their parking lot will be changing. In addition, from a management standpoint, the fact that we have planned on and are working on joint management of parking, I believe, is very much in favor of this application. That we're looking at the real situation, and we're also trying to approve the way parking is being managed currently.
Well, I see what you're saying, and I think that managing the parking together is going to be helpful to everybody. I think it's it's going to make, you know, the possibility of however many cars we have going into the new restaurant, something that's not quite as noticeable as you might think, because there is a lot of extra parking now with the Church Street lot as well as the Sprint lot. So, so inasmuch as we're not particularly, we see that the control on these spots is within the purview of these two entities. And, and I think that is something that gives us an idea of where we think the sufficiency of the parking is. So,
I think the way that we could leave it, instead of tying ourselves in knots here, is we put the onus on the applicant and on the restaurants. And that we simply, if we're going to go in this direction, that the condition be that the applicant provides a sufficiency of parking, leave the flexibility to how to provide that to the applicant, making sure that in terms of the conditions that we specify that the parking should take place in off-street settings, that it be managed appropriately, and that it be located appropriately. And that way we give flexibility to the board, we give some direction to the enforcement authority, and we kind of set it up so that we don't have to go through this convoluted mind game once again.
Good, thank you.
now the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that we can't decide where the valet parking goes or anything along that line. That's something that the Traffic Commission and the Police Department do.
But having said
So-
that, you have to realize that you're going to be at the whims of the building commissioner and of the police department, the traffic commission, in terms of how this gets set up. So we're trading away flexibility for trading flexibility for certainty here. Now, having said that, I'm sure that there are going to be concerns with these routes. So, you know, I'm talking about this as a way to go forward, and I'm talking about things in the abstract here, because I haven't made up my mind about this application yet. I want that made clear, and I don't think my fellow board members have either.
And I would add, it's a concept plan. That's exactly the reason why I would ask that the board not actually write a valet parking plan with, you know, exactly what the directions and the parking site will be, because it will be a matter for the Traffic Commission, the Police Department, and the town.
Well, if I were to write this, I would write it in such a way that the applicant would be required to present to the building commissioner for his review and approval, a professionally designed, professionally managed parking plan, and then leave it to the building inspector in order to come up with, leave it to our enforcement authorities as to what is sufficient and what not, give them some flexibility.
I believe that's consistent with how we're proceeding, and I don't believe that we object to that. I actually think that it's one of the things that should be happening with these applications, that's what's going to lead to a better system.
I think one of the applicants was interested in speaking.
Talk about our meeting yesterday as well.
I think there's also a member.
Bob Falcone. We briefly met yesterday with police chief and town planner in the square and discussed where, where the location would be agreeable for valet parking and for some type of relief for a delivery zone. And that's when we came to the spot in front of Starbucks. It's easy for a trailer truck to be able to pull down as the street and be able to back in. So it's because it's an end spot. And that was the suggestion of those two gentlemen, and in agreement with us too, and the valet people. And we're going to use temporary signs. We'll have sandwich signs, sandwich boards, which we use now, that direct the patrons to different parking lots. It'll say parking available for this restaurant at 4 Franklin Street or Citizens Bank if they want to park there. So, there's not going to be going down any one-ways, or they're not going to be making U-turns in the street. That was designed by, as Van said, a professional to obey all the laws and the traffic patterns that the town has put in force.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Probably should have given you the memo that I was supposed to give you at the beginning, but since it sounds like we're going to be continuing this, I will pass it out so that you have it. Because I did explain, for example, the discussion about signs of the planning board and some of the other topics that cross from site plan review to parking. So for your information, nothing new, but it's a recap of what happened with the planning board and what issues are before us.
Is this a third memo?
This is a memo that I wrote just for today's meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know it might look a little bit like the one I originally gave you, but
It
this
is a
is
third, yeah.
just to address, where we are right now, what we discussed with the planning board, what issues were common, and what issues remain relating to reconstruction of a non-conforming structure. So that's what this memo's about, and I think I've addressed most of what's in here, but the mention of signs reminded me that I didn't say anything about that. But we did talk about signs and wayfinding and how you instruct patrons where the parking is, and the use of signs that can be moved is actually a very good way. You put a sign out at 5 PM, you take it in during the day if there isn't restaurant parking at a site, and so on and so forth. That temporary signs are used now in the Falcone lot, and we feel they work quite well. Any other signs, permanent signs along Granite Ave, we would apply to the town for, but I think they should be considered as well to direct people to where they should go for restaurant parking. It's all part of parking management.
Do you want to open it up
Traffic.
to the audience and then go on to the renovation, some of the questions having to do with the renovations? No, let's open it up to the public.
Okay. I realize there are people that probably want to speak and go home, so I will open that up for people that would like to speak in favor of the application, keeping in mind that we've heard a lot already. So if you agree with something, you can state it pretty quickly. If you disagree with something, which will be after this, again, you can make reference to the issue. If you have another insight into the issue that we might not have heard, mention that quickly. Again, we're looking for people right now who would like to speak in favor of the application. Please state your name and address and come right up to the microphone. Is there anybody that would like to speak in favor of the application? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak in against the application or that might have questions for the applicant?
Tony McDonald, 4 Mechanic Street, East Milton Square. I don't know if anyone's ever gone through Quincy Center. Alba's has valet parking, a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And Hancock Street is much wider than Adams Street. They're double parked. It's a nightmare there. It seems like every time we come here, there's, oh, we've got another lot down by the expressway, or, something new for parking, This is another restaurant. It's gonna attract more people. There was one restaurant that went in there, Abbey Park. That's sufficient for that area. This is gonna attract a lot more people and a lot more cars for parking, and I know your issue is parking. And it's a nice thought, the valet parking, but just drive through Quincy Square.
Well, I might suggest that perhaps they need to do some enforcement in Quincy, and in Milton, we're gonna make sure that they do it.
Well, I've been in Milton now quite a while, and it seems to me that the sign's one way, it's just a mere suggestion. Just a mere suggestion, because Mechanic Street is a one-way, and I can't tell you how many people go up my street. And not only do they go up my street, they go through my driveway. So this is going to put more cars in the residential area.
Okay, I think we understand your concern. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Beeler, at 81 Church Street. I did speak last time, but I did have 2 questions just from what was talked about today, if you don't mind. My first one is, during the day on 4 Franklin, my question is there anybody else that uses that parking? Because I know Abbey Park does as well, but I know there's some medical offices in there, and I don't know if they have rights to those spots as well, so I'd be curious about that. Number 2, excuse me, Ms. McKettrick mentioned kind of anecdotally that she doesn't use valet, and personally I don't myself, so my question would be, is this going to be required that you use valet? Because still there's 4 separate parking spots, so I'm confused at how valet parking would help manage that, unless it's required. Thanks.
Well, valet is only like if it's needed. Otherwise, we've got 2 parking lots where anybody can park. Right now, Abbey Park does not need valet, and they've proved that. There's always parking around. We're adding an extra 25 spots. We don't really feel that it'd be a huge problem. Yes, no, we're not going to enforce, you're not going to have to do valet. Of course not. I mean, you don't do that now at Steel and Rye. If you want to pull up, you can park anywhere you want. But
And the answer to the
valet will be an option.
The first question is, the parking lot at 4 Franklin Street is manned with an attendant. There's parking stalls for the occupants of the building, which is public dentist's office, ourselves, our offices are there, and there's a real estate office there. So, till 5 o'clock at night, it's tenants only, and we have an attendant there. And there's not an issue with any parking in there. And if Abbey Park has a private party or something, our attendant does let people park there. It's not an issue.
I have a letter from my mother. She was here last time. Suzanne Brown, 566 Adams Street, corner Church and Adams. I have a letter from my mother, which I'll read, but in regard to this parking plan that you have in front of you, the application asks for 25 spaces, but you're allowing them 33, which would allow for 8 stacked, which is a public safety hazard because there would be no access to emergency vehicles in the parking lot in the event that that restaurant goes on fire. So when you did your numbers, you gave them 123. That's including stacked parking.
Yes, it is.
And really, they only should have 100, because the stacked parking is a public safety hazard. How are you getting a fire engine in there if there's an accident? Says right here.
You know what? Let's keep it to the conversations.
I'm only going by what's here.
Right, all right, well, there's 100.
You know what? Let's keep the conversations to the board.
Yeah.
We had enough of this between people last time around. If you're going to have conversations, you have conversations with the board and not with the audience or anybody else. All the questions, all the comments are going to be addressed to the board. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to read this and then. Dear Board, we were unable to speak last meeting and apologize for not being there tonight. We have owned our present house at the corner of Church and Adams for over 50 years, which is directly opposite the proposed Falcone parking lot. Each person that is in favor of the parking lot talks about the tax revenues it would generate along with the development, along with improving the square. The parking lot proposed on Church Street would severely impact us and our neighbors. The cars exiting the proposed parking lot would shine in each bedroom on the first floor rental property, which would financially hurt us if we were unable to rent the unit or if our rental income had to be discounted. The proposed parking lot has double spaces, which would be useless unless valet service was approved, and as far as we know, unless otherwise we knew tonight it was approved. There has not been mention of how the lot would be managed to avoid the lot being full with people shopping in the square, leaving no room for restaurant parking. We've asked about the lighting as far as type, positioning, brightness that would have an impact on the neighbors. These lights would have to be on throughout the night due to state law. We've yet to receive any information. Also, the noise alone from the car doors slamming and the people leaving the establishment would impact the quality of life and sleep. Since the proposed plan is to level the 2 houses, there's been no mention of the impact of the construction of the demolition of the houses, the construction of the catch basins, and the new utility lines on Church Street that would impact the neighboring houses. The dirt alone would make it impossible to be outside this summer. We are not against the restaurant, but firmly against the parking lot due to the impact it will have on us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Gene Lorden. I live across the street from the proposed parking lot. And has anybody?
What's your address? What's your, 11?
Gene Lorden,
And your address, I'm sorry?
11 Church Street.
Church Street.
Has anybody looked at any other areas besides the Church Street parking lot, like additional businesses, perhaps? allowing them to use the parking lot at night?
Well, I think that has been done, as a matter of fact, and using the new parking lot, as well as the Citizens parking lot. So,
Being that it's valet, does it have to be parking within the East Milton area, or can it be brought out to different areas of the town?
I don't-
Maybe,
I don't think that would, I don't think anybody would use valet service if people were driving to very long places away from the square, unfortunately. I mean, the square is a center of activity, and the cars would need to be in that area.
Has anybody ever thought about putting up maybe a single structure parking garage or anything that would,
Well, I think you might want to talk to the town planner on that one.
where people would drive in and be all enclosed within an area?
A
You know,
lot of
it's-
these issues, sorry,
It's
will be
be-
addressed by the planning board. And I think the concern that the lady just brought, for instance, about, safety, ambulance, we don't have the expertise to actually address that, right? And I think the applicant will have to explain all that before the planning board, which is, in a way, I've said this again and again, you're here, but you're gonna be expressing a lot of concerns that aren't germane to the issue of adequacy of existing parking spaces. And it may not be, and again, for things like density, safety, those are all matters that are before the planning board. If, in a way, we're almost just looking at numbers. If they make available X number of parking spots, and you've heard the testimony about, that's more than 2.5 spots per seat at this restaurant, that's what we're talking about, folks. I think a lot of these other issues are valid, but they'll have to be taken up by the planning board. Lighting, trash, sewage, dust, construction, destruction.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Robert Kelly, 65 Franklin Street. I don't know, one comment, I don't know where this 2.5 ratio, I guess it comes from some of the other restaurants in town when they appeared before the board. But I would suggest to you that, for instance, Steel and Rye, that locale is distinguishable from East Milton Square. And you've heard ad nauseum of the existing traffic / parking issues that exist right now. And if this new project proceeds, obviously there'll be more parking, and that's what we're talking about. Franklin Street and Church Street, they're tiny side streets, and they were designed in the 30s and the 40s. We're bursting at the seams now, and if we're going to have a high-end restaurant with 160 new seats, obviously there's going to be more cars in the neighborhood. And the valet parking, it sounds good on paper, but what if there's and it's going to be valet for 2 restaurants. So what if there's a slight backup and the valets have to tell the customers, it's going to be 5 or 10 minutes. What's to prevent the patrons from just ditching their cars on Franklin or Church Street? A lot of people are not patient. So I don't see any, is there any commitment from the ownership to, how about a police detail Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, 6 to 8, just to make sure that, there is enforcement. I think that's something that could be looked at. Because, patrons to a restaurant, they want to get in and seated. They don't want to hear, you have to wait. Human nature being what it is, and some people don't do valet. It's not mandatory, so some patrons are just going to dump and run. So I think the board needs to be aware of that and to think that through. I will share with you very recently, as I said, I live in Franklin Street, I had to do a 5-point turn to get out of my driveway. Some individual parked directly behind my driveway, a couple days in a row, probably a customer from, you know, an existing business in East Milton Square. Same car there, a couple days in a row. You know, that's very annoying. And my wife is a brand-new driver. You can imagine, you know, this is a quality of life issue. Franklin Street, it came up at the last meeting. Right now, we have signs all over Franklin Street, 30-minute parking. You know, that, you don't see that many places. And the reason that those signs are up is that there's issues, there's lots of issues. And I would just ask this board, in considering the application before you, to think about quality of life for those of us who live in East Milton Square. It's a densely packed neighborhood, and Franklin Street and Church Street are very different from Elliott Street where Steel and Rye is, or the Wharf. You know, those are kind of self-sufficient areas. You know, finally, I would also point out that I was here 2 months ago, and I've heard the testimony tonight. There seems to me to be a lot of contingencies with this application. And, you know, 2 months ago there was talk about maybe we'll work with Santander Bank, and tonight, you know, there's, well, we just bought a building, hopefully the parking there will work. You know, I think things should be locked down and in writing right now. And if they're not, I think that should be held to the detriment of the applicant. Because, you know, we can't keep coming before you, you know, everyone. It's not fair to everybody. So I think that's a huge issue, that things are not in place, and they should be, because obviously there's not unanimity with this project. And if everything's, yeah, maybe, I think so, that's, you know, that's to the detriment of the application. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just stay there for a second.
Sure.
I think Mr. O'Brien would like to address some of those issues.
I think that this, a couple of things. First of all, it should not be held against the applicant that their plans are changing and are in flux. That's just the nature of these type of public hearings. Things change, and an applicant who is serious, which is this particular applicant is, will, with the advice of counsel, and they have experienced counsel here at the table, will change the plans to reflect some of the concerns that have been expressed in prior hearings and which have been expressed again today. So that's not at all unusual. As a matter of fact, it's something that the board welcomes. Relative to the second point that you've made, and that has to do with certainty, I think the board also wants to provide a certain level of certainty whichever way it decides to rule, because it's not fair to either the applicant or the residents to either A, have to keep coming back, or B, when and if there are problems on down the road, wherever they may be, have no idea who to go to, and our enforcement authority has no idea what he or she is trying to enforce. So what this board will do in any application before it, whether it be this one or any other one, is endeavor to provide some certainty to both the applicant and the people that are going to be impacted by it. So we are mindful of the concerns that you've expressed both on this application, as a matter of fact, on all of the other applications that come before the board. So I appreciate your testimony, and I thank you for the points that you've made.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Carol Joyce Harrington of 41 Franklin Street. I'm here with my husband Dick, who actually was responsible for getting those 30-minute signs put on Franklin Street for the parking, for the simple fact that we couldn't even have guests to our home to park in front of our house because there was people from restaurants or the gym or shopping at the fruit center that didn't want to battle with their parking lot, parking on Franklin, Bassett, and Church. One other thing that Mrs. McKettrick had brought up, and I believe is in your purview, was the condition of a state-of-the-art kitchen exhaust system. I don't need to know that the special at Abbey Park or the new restaurant is fish because I'll know it's Wednesday because the smell is wafting through the neighborhood. We went through this with Mr. Welch, and he was very accommodating. The same thing goes with Chan's, the Chinese food smells. There's another new restaurant going in at the Milton Fruit Center. We seem to be in our neighborhood getting a lot of new traffic, more traffic. 5 new liquor licenses have been granted, and a lot of that is in East Milton Square. So again, I agree with all the traffic concerns. It's a nightmare at times. We were having work done on our home. We couldn't even have the construction folks park in front of our house because there were cars there parked for more than 30 minutes. So enforcement's key. And I would suggest too that the kitchen exhaust system really be looked at so that we don't get the wafting smells and we have to shut our windows in the summer.
I understand your concern, but that's going to be a planning board issue.
Okay, I'm just raising it tonight. I didn't get to the other meetings. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Ed Duffy. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 7, Granite Place, 35 Granite Place. I think I'm the longest living neighbor of that neighborhood that's here tonight. I was born in Cunningham Park in 1943. There's some concern about the traffic patterns and the size of the streets and so forth, and somebody had some misinformation. But just let me give you an idea of where the main impact, neighborhood impact will be. To the west of the proposed restaurant is all business. To the east of the proposed restaurant is all my neighborhood. And a few streets, just by way of today's standards, the planning board will require a 50-foot wide street in a new subdivision. With a special permit, they will grant a 40-foot wide if special conditions exist. Pierce Street Mechanic Street is 33 feet wide. And cars, under this plan, cars will be going down Mechanic Street, 33 feet wide. Church Place was accepted as a legal public way in 1904, 110 years ago. Belcher Circle is in 50 feet wide. It's not 30 feet, 40 feet wide. It's 33 feet wide. It's 110 years old as a legal way. Brackett Street, which I abut on one side of the house, hails from 1889. It's 30 feet wide, 125 years old. No cars or trucks back then, all horses and wagons. That's what our neighborhood was built for. Bunton Street, 30 feet wide, 107 years old. Granite Place, the street I live on, 30 feet wide, 141 years old when it was illegal, accepted as a public way. These streets were not built for automobiles or buses. They were built for horses and wagons. It's a delightful place to live, but these streets certainly can't support what was being proposed here. I would just like to say one thing about parking with the valet parking. Valet parking means 3 things: speed, speed, and speed through these narrow streets. Speed, speed, speed. Danger with your children out on the sidewalk all the time. They'll be going like madmen to make more money. With your permission, Madam Chair, I would like to just ask the audience behind me 3 questions, if I could, please. I'd like to poll them to see how many people are my neighbors of where I live. Raise your hand if you're a neighbor. Now, with your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask, keep your hands up, please. How many of you approve of this plan? Raise your hand if you, put your hands down if you don't approve. And how many approve? 0. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy.
Evening, I'm Colleen Malloy. I live at 11 Duggan Lane, which is a small cul-de-sac off of Church Street in the neighborhood everybody's been talking about, but this little cul-de-sac hasn't been talked about. I just want to speak to the traffic impact. I have small children. There are a lot of children who play in our cul-de-sac. It's a private way. It's off of Church Street. That light is the slowest light, I think, on earth. And the backup of traffic in the evening backs down to where we have to exit the circle. People park on the left-hand side of the street illegally. It's hard for us to turn out if there's only enough room for one car to go up. And so I just want you to take into consideration that a lot of cars, when they see that light and the traffic, come into the circle and turn around and come out. And they speed. They don't even hit the brake. They come in and they fly around and turn out. And it's very dangerous for our children, who should be able to play in the circle in a private way. So I just wanted to bring that point to your attention as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Lane. I live at 85 Highland Street. I wanted to raise two different issues, one of which is what I think is the threshold issue that's a little bit gotten short shrift because of the concern about the parking. I see the parking as just a part of the issue that's before this board and the issue that's only before this board, which is whether this change in the use of the nonconforming structure creates a more substantial detriment to the neighborhood than the existing use. That will be decided by you and not by the planning board, although there is an overlap on the issue of the parking, the effect of the change in the parking. As to the substantial detriment to the neighborhood, I'd like to point out a couple of things. First of all, nothing has been said about the fact that there is a loss of 3 units of apparently affordable housing, and that is not insignificant in Milton. And I haven't heard any discussion of the value of that, both because the housing stock in Milton is sorely in need of units like this, and also because of the change on the neighborhood. This board determines what the neighborhood is. Certainly the neighborhood is the immediately surrounding buildings, regardless of how they are zoned. And I know that there's a zoning boundary line there, but that does not define the neighborhood. From that, I would go to looking creatively at the parking. I don't think it's a given that the parking, especially if it's going to be valet parking, has to be so close to this building. I'm hearing again and again about the burden on these neighborhood streets. Certainly if you go to a restaurant in Boston, let's say, or any other community, sometimes the valet parking is not particularly close. I do agree that there is an incentive built into valet parking for the valet to be very speedy and so forth. And people have all kinds of stories you can hear about what happened when their car was valet parked and so forth. But the fact is that I don't see that there's any necessity that the valet parking be so closely located to the building so that it actually changes the nature of that neighborhood, and it will change the nature of the neighborhood. The other thing that I'd like to point out is the issue about the off-site parking, and specifically comes to mind is the Citizens Bank parking lot. We have heard that there is an agreement between the owner of Abbey Park and Citizens Bank. We don't know what the terms of that are and whether that is assignable or can be broadened to include someone else to use it. The fear that I would have is that if the parking is not secured for the length of time that special permit, if it issues, will be exercised, then we'll have a problem. And we see with banks all around the state, you can see that what used to be a large facility is either changed in use or is used only for an ATM, and that's prime property there that could be used for any number of things. It could be a day spa, it could be another restaurant, it could be who knows what. So if that parking isn't locked in, so that this board knows if it issues that special permit that parking is going to be available as long as that special permit is used, Because if that building gets reused, if the building at issue here gets reused, then it may need another special permit, you can look at it again. But so long as parking is supposed to be accessory to the restaurant, I think it's absolutely crucial that there be a legal document that binds that parking to this use for the life of the use. That's something certainly that the planning board will be looking at, but I think it's also a part of your considering the detriment to the neighborhood, so I see that it is a part of your determination.
Can I ask a couple of questions? Are you, before you go, are you an attorney?
I am.
Thank you for reading the zoning code.
Well, and you've read it too, obviously.
Thank you. Just in general, special permits are for a term of years. Mrs. McKettrick, you've had a lot of experience with special permits. They tend to be 5, 6, 7 years, or a shorter period of time, if I recall correctly.
I don't recall that the other restaurant parking permits have been for a term of years. But a permit, special permit can be for a term of years, if there's a good reason to do it.
Thanks for that clarification.
In terms of the length, I think it depends on what the purpose of the term is, so. And certainly, I would say this much, I'm not a developer, I'm not the investor, but certainly when someone is proposing investing a substantial amount of money in a new development or a new project, they need an adequate length of time to deal with financing and issues like that. So they probably would need to respond. The applicants themselves might want to respond to that question. If you were thinking of a term for the permit, what would allow, what would be too short to be workable in terms of the amount of investment and so forth that would have to be put into this project. The restaurant site and the parking lots are owned by the applicant in this case. They are secured to this use. So we certainly could, if you'd like me to consult them now or consult them afterwards, I'd be happy to do that.
That's okay. I was just looking for a clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yes.
My name is Larry Lerner. I live at 54 Church Street. I've been there 41 years. And in that time, I've seen the quality of life in East Milton go nowhere but down the hill. And the reason for that is traffic, parking, pollution. Valet parking, I've heard a lot about that tonight. If you know anything about valet parking, these kids run out, they open the door, they jump in the car, and they fly to wherever they're gonna park the car. And these kids are hustling, you can't blame them, they're looking for tips. If you're gonna have valet parking on Adams Street, every time a door on Adams Street is opened, the traffic comes to a stop. The traffic on Church Street, Bassett, particularly Bassett and Franklin, during the rush hours, morning and evening, is ridiculous. The traffic on Bassett Street backs up from Granite Avenue back to Church Street, then going up toward Granite Place. It's ridiculous. 10 years ago, I had the pleasure of paying for 3 weddings for my daughters. And I'm still in the hole. But I so much wanted my kids to stay in the neighborhood and raise their families there. All 3 of them moved out, and I said, geez, why don't you stay? Dad, it's crazy. You can't move around here. This is 10 years ago. The traffic was ridiculous. They were concerned about pollution. You can't talk about parking without talking about traffic, and you can't talk about those without quality of life. And frankly, the quality of life in the neighborhood has been going down. And, I'm not here to disparage the Falcone family. I wish them well. If there's some way they could get the restaurant in there and make a go of it, I'm more than happy for them. But the contingencies for it are just, to me, overwhelming. Whenever the board makes their decision, again, hot copy for the horse. I don't know what the The planning board and this board, frankly, I'm still confused about that. But
You're not alone.
But that lot on Church Street where they want to demolish the two houses, in my opinion, is a big mistake. If you've ever tried to go up Church Street, when the guy from Stella's is unloading his dumpster, they have to wheel the dumpster out into the street, they block the street, while they hook the dumpster back to the truck, I mean, the noise is horrendous. Then the guy, so that street is blocked for almost 10 minutes, nothing can get by. The noise from the fruit center in the morning when they're unloading their dumpsters is awful. And, you know, I've been in the demolition industry over 50 years, and I know what a blight, a parking lot in a neighborhood can do. Believe me, it's not a good thing. It's nothing but blight. And no matter how much lighting you have or so-called security, they don't work. They're frankly ugly. And I would just hope the board considers all of this. Thanks for your time, anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. One last chance. Anyone else? Okay. We'll close the evidentiary portion of the hearing. And we get to deliberate in front of you as per the law on...
Do you want to give the applicant an opportunity to say anything before we close?
Was there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things. One is that for this application, unlike other, first of all, every other recent Board of Appeals decision on parking for restaurants, and we only have a few in Milton that have liquor licenses, and that tends to make for a bigger business with a restaurant. Those applications, including the ones that went to the planning board for particular reasons, specified a 4-to-1 parking ratio. We're not proposing that parking ratio for this restaurant. We're proposing a 2.5-to-1 parking ratio. We haven't talked about lunchtime hours, but those might be different. The capacity determination by your board might be different for lunchtime, because not all the spaces in the Falcone lot are available at lunchtime. They're also used by other businesses. But we have proposed and have purchased the entire site, which is in the commercial district, in order to provide additional parking. And additional parking is clearly called for by the comments that you've been hearing. You have to provide more off-street parking if you're going to add an additional use. It's required by our bylaw. We are doing that. We are also designating a lot, which is also owned by the applicant. This lot isn't going to go away. It isn't going to be, it can't be taken away by some other owner. It will be for the purpose of the use of this restaurant. Parking management, I agree, is a difficult issue. It requires a certain amount of vigorous enforcement effort by the town that's perhaps not occurring. I've talked about resident-only parking as an option. I'm not sure the police chief is very enthusiastic about it, but I wish the neighbors would pursue it, because resident-only parking is one way to protect parking spaces in front of your house when you're in a residential area next to a commercial district. And it's used in other towns like Brookline and so on and so forth. Furthermore, parking management can be done with a valet parking system. If it works well, if you don't have problems, if you manage it, you don't have speeding and other issues that people have raised tonight, keeping patrons in your parking lot and not allowing other shoppers in your lot requires that you manage the lot, and it often requires that you have an attendant. We talked about that at the first hearing. The Falcones have used attendants for years at their parking lot during the day for exactly that reason, to keep other shoppers out and to allow those in who have a right to use the lot. So I think these are important details. I think all of the neighbors are concerned that we can't manage this, and what I'm trying to say, what we've said to you so far is we have proposed a number of solutions to provide good management. We are willing to look at any solution that might work, but we think that some of the things that we've proposed would help. We think that the parking situation in East Milton Square needs to be looked at as a whole and managed as a whole, but that we can't do that without the help of the town. All we have been able to do so far is to work with the one other major restaurant, to talk with them about how we can manage parking together. Some people who spoke tonight talked about valet parking at greater distance. As long as it's not a ridiculous distance so people feel their cars aren't secure, I don't think the distance is that much of an issue if there's a parking lot that can be secured for the use. But having a small amount of parking next to this restaurant is important, if only because we want to have an off-street place where small trucks can deliver. We have to have a place to put a dumpster. There has to be a parking next to this restaurant, and it needs to be dedicated to the restaurant's use. I don't, this proposal isn't going to work without a parking lot associated with it. Fortunately, these applicants can also provide another lot that has 39 spaces. The total number of spaces is more than adequate for the use, and it greatly exceeds the amount of parking that has been provided for other restaurants in prior applications, but East Milton Square is a unique problem. It has a lot of congestion. A lot of the congestion that we're talking about is during the rush hour. The restaurant won't be open in the morning. The restaurant's biggest business will be occurring as the rush hour tapers off and as you go into the later hours of the evening. It is much quieter in East Milton Square in terms of parking congestion in those later hours. And that's one reason a restaurant is being proposed. It's a use that can work into that, what is busy in the square and the times when the square isn't busy. The other reason this proposal is being made is because it can fit into the existing building. We don't have to change the building. We don't have to make it higher. We don't have to build a parking garage on top of it. We wouldn't be able to afford to anyway for a single use like this. It's a use that can work. And I think the many issues that have been mentioned at this hearing and the previous hearing, those of which that relate to parking, I think we've proposed some solutions. We're willing to work with the board on conditions that would be appropriate. And I think we can make this work. I think it's not a simple matter to decide exactly how to manage the parking and the traffic, but I do think it can work. And I do think that the cooperation of the town and better enforcement by the town is part of the picture. A lot of what people have been talking about relates to that. We're all in favor of it. We'll work for it. The Falcones will work for it. It will help the restaurant. It will help the neighbors. In other respects, the plan that we proposed to you for parking does control impact on the neighborhood because it puts cars off the street, it puts them next to the restaurant, and it provides enough spaces so that no one's going to have to look for a parking space in a neighborhood to come to this restaurant. The other part of keeping commercial uses out of a restaurant, out of a neighborhood though, and a residential neighborhood, is having parking regulations in the residential neighborhood that say that it's, either you have resident-only parking, yes, you can have short-term parking, but you have to have enforcement. And it sounds to me like enforcement is part of the problem that's being complained about. That's not something we can provide. All we can tell you is the restaurant will produce some revenue, and I think it's very common in situations where there's a new development for some of that revenue to be, addressed to the problems that the neighborhood has because of increased parking and traffic. That's about as far as I can talk about the revenue. I've talked about it before. I understand that that's not the answer for the neighbors, but the fact that there's going to be revenue, more meals taxes, and more tax revenue because of this use provides resources to address some of these parking issues. I think the two things can work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien,
Close the hearing.
we have.
Okay, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
The chicken or the egg is the question, isn't it?
I am uncomfortable with the lack of direction coming from the planning board, because many of the issues here are planning board issues. In the past, the board has granted special permits, assuming that there is assuming that the planning board does sign off on the site plan. I wonder if that's appropriate here. And the reason why I wonder about it is because of the depth and breadth of the concern from the neighborhood surrounding this. And I'm concerned that there may be additional issues that could develop, that whatnot, that may need to find their way into the special permit if one is to be granted. Typically, the special permits that I have sat on that need site plan approval from the board, from the planning board, have not been as controversial as this one has been, or would appear to me. So I have some concerns about that, and I'd like to hear what my fellow board members have to say.
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody, for coming in and expressing your views on this. I too am troubled by this. I think there's sort of an avoidable conflict when you get between, at the border of two zoning districts. There's a commercially zoned area where it's perfectly permissible to operate a restaurant. There's also a residential area that for the last 30 years or so has grown accustomed to a certain way of life that we're being asked to disturb. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. I'm troubled by the fact that to grant a special permit, and I'm going to read verbatim what the bylaw says, we need to find that the grant of it would not cause a substantial detriment to the public good. I'm looking at the public, and I'm thinking, how is this not affecting detrimentally the public good? I also agree that East Milton Square is not the same as the area around Steel and Rye. I live in the area. I know the size of those streets. Thank you, Mr. Duffy, for those statistics. But there's a conflict here in the decision, whether we make it or the planning board makes it, a decision will have to be made. And I think these conflicts are unavoidable when you get to the sort of frontier between the two. The applicant is entitled to develop his commercial property, right? Property rights are paramount. And the applicant has taken painstaking efforts at coming up with a solution that will address this. I'm concerned about the, I don't want to call it loosey-goosey, but less than fully airtight arrangement on the parking. I worry that if we approve this parking, that this application will maybe creating an enforcement problem for Abbey Park should relationships sour, right? Right now, we're proposed with a almost joint application. There's harmony. Everyone's going to be working together. But if the applicant assumes lots 1 and 2 and 3, which it owns, I think Abbey Park is left with an enforcement issue. It will not have sufficient parking. I worry about that. We shouldn't be solving one problem and creating another. I also understand how we can't require the parties to contract, even though part of me would like that. Having said all that, I think we need to decide on this, and I think that there are ways to address a lot of the concerns that have been raised here today. The other thing I wanted to point out is, just for people to hear, is what it is that the planning board is going to need to address. So any sort of detriment or offensive use that's caused by this on the adjoining properties has to be decided by someone mentioned fumes and smells and so on. Safety issues, someone mentioned kids and the effect, and I know, appreciate the comment about the light. So I want to hear from Madam Chairwoman and Mr. O'Brien as well. I think we need to decide this. I think the applicant has taken steps to address some of the concerns. The numbers appear reasonable. And again, Abbey Park's not before us, and I hate to sound technical like a lawyer, but the applicant has made its case for the number of parking spots it will be making available for the new restaurant. If you look at this literally, I think the case has been made. But there's also, that's on the parking side, but there's also an application for special permit here that requires us to consider the public good. And I'm troubled by that. I don't think that I can in good conscience say that we can approve this without substantially causing detriment to the public good. I mean, I'd like to hear what you folks think, but.
Well, I'm of the opinion that there is enough parking. I'm also of the opinion that the parking that will be coming to the square, that's new to the square, is significant. And that's going to make parking better for everybody in the square. And I think that that actually will be taking some of the traffic off of the streets for people that aren't circling around for parking, looking for parking. It does concern me that we have so much valet traffic going through the neighborhoods, and I understand that. I understand that they do tend to drive fast, and they are narrow streets. It almost makes me believe that valet parking should not be part of this, but that's not my decision to make. I do see that this part, the traffic issue, addressing Manny's concern